So we're going to try to stay on time. We're going to have a very informative and interesting presentations from 4 great speakers. So this is all about the container deposit scheme or the container refund scheme, depending which state you're in. We're going to discuss the background, the current and future opportunities that this new public policy presents, which really revolutionises recycling in Australia. Each speaker has 20 minutes, 18 minutes to speak, and then 2 minutes for questions. Because we've got some online participants, the first lot of questions will go to the online people, and I've got the app, and then we'll have a general discussion with everybody so the questions can come from the floor. So our first speaker this morning is Cathy Cook, who is a former diplomat, political advisor with 15 years global experience, currently sits on the board of COEX, the Queensland scheme, so very much at the coalface, and she's going to talk about her thoughts about the new and future opportunities for CDS that provides for the Australian society. Please welcome Cathy.
Thanks, Anne. I was hoping they put that groovy bossa music on for me to dance up on stage. It's bossa everywhere. Has everyone noticed that? It's amazing. All right. I have very few slides today, so I'll be just a talking head. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the Container Deposit Scheme breakout stream today, and thank you to the Waste 2024 team for inviting me. I'm one of a team of passionate professionals at the Australian Beverages Council who work to make CDS a vital part of Australia's approach to sustainability. We partner with scheme coordinators, network operators, state and territory governments, non-alcoholic and alcoholic beverage companies and everyday consumers. We proudly own our stake in optimising extended producer responsibility initiatives within Australia and internationally. If you don't know us, my elevator pitch now, the Australian Beverages Council is the peak body, the industry association, which has represented the non-alcoholic beverages sector for more than 75 years. Our members comprise 95% of the industry's production volume, range from the largest drinks manufacturers to innovative small and micro beverage companies whose drinks are enjoyed nationally as well as around the world. It's amazing in Australia we have these amazing SMEs who have a great product and export it just in a nanosecond, often exported before it's even available right across the nation. So very proud of our sector. For every direct employee in our industry, there are 4.9 jobs created elsewhere along our value chain. We're involved in some major issues for Australia's society and economy, from industry development, value-added food production, natural disaster preparedness and response, and of course sustainability. And it's our work on sustainability that I'll focus on today. Australia's journey to adopt container deposit or refund schemes, as Anne said, CDS, has been a multi-decade undertaking. As we stand now, we have a patchwork of approaches, with each jurisdiction creating systems with similarities and differences, particularly regarding governance and increasingly regarding scope. In a federal system, nationally harmonised approaches to local issues are hard to achieve, even in the best of times, and I acknowledge my industry shares responsibility for the fact that we don't have a unified approach to CDS yet. We do live and learn. And for those who don't know, some time ago when South Australia, almost 50 years CDS, I think, now, when Northern Territory was the second jurisdiction to want CDS, my sector took the government to court. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And we lost every time. But back then, there was a really myopic approach. No one talked resource recovery. Circularity wasn't even an idea in someone's mind, so I think we've really changed. Jump to my next paragraph. Despite these differences, Australia's schemes are the benchmark of Australian circular economy practice. Beverage container recycling achieves both circularity, return of recycled content back into the supply chain, and resource recovery rates far beyond any other consumer category nationally. In April this year, APCO released its Australian This is a long title. Australian Packaging Consumption and Recovery Report 21 to 22. The report showed an impressive return rate of 70.7%, broken up into the following segments. There they are. CDS depots and RVMs comprise roughly 54% of containers recovered. MRFs are at 11%, and the collected but unredeemed deposit category, 5.6%. So while over 70% is pretty impressive, right? This means about 29% of containers are going to landfill or they're unrecovered. So we need to do something to collect that 29%. And capturing the missing 29% is very important for ABCL, the Australian Beverages Council. We're working through domestic and international policy reform, advocacy for better and more available return mechanisms, and addressing domestic recovery gaps, with the goal of making it easier to close the gap. For example, we know that multiple user dwellings, MUDs, commercial industrial properties, C&Is, I never assume people know the acronyms. I will talk acronyms from now on though. And public sector and public spaces are weak links in terms of recovery that really need action. One area that could be impactful is having all levels of government throughout the country take a leadership role and mandate the separation and recovery of CDS materials in government-owned and leased buildings, facilities and stadiums. I'm reminded of this every time I go to Canberra and grab a coffee in Parliament House, where the cafe has one small plastic waste bin. It is seriously this big. And that waste bin is for all waste, including the hundreds of CDS containers consumed by politicians and their staffers each and every day they're in Parliament. Government's a big consumer, and improving its own behaviour can send a really clear and strong signal and model best practice. As an industry, Beverages is proud of our role in incentivising consumers to return materials in a source-separated, decontaminated way. My industry wants our containers to go round the circle many times, and to do that, we need good, clean feedstock domestically available. Repeated analysis of Australia's schemes consistently finds that CDS recovers more materials and retains a higher value material output than curbside collection. However, the statistic from South Australia's Recycling Makes Sense report in 2021 that 85% of South Australia's beautiful, clean, high-value glass is downgraded into civil construction should really concern us all. And while feeding materials into civil and construction projects is far better than consigning those materials to landfill, a truly successful circular economy demands a higher standard. Ensuring a consistent, quality, food-grade recycled material supply for integration into new Australian food and beverage products is fundamentally what drives our philosophy and practice. We're really grateful too to have a network of peak bodies that share our views on the circular economy and look to greater opportunities and cohesive policy development in the space. So that's the landscape at the moment. What's next for CDS? Well, I've already mentioned how leadership from government could be a terrific first next step, as could mandating all new mud and C&I builds to have CDS chutes and designated CDS bins in the basement. On top of these, we believe there are two key improvements that could move Australia's CDS to an innovative world-class system. And these are achieving administrative harmonisation and expansion of CDS scope to include other items in the retail trolley. I've used the supermarket trolley as an analogy here. The first innovation is not groundbreaking, is it? We currently face disparate definitions for eligible containers, different pricing, administrative processes, and compliance monitoring of varying complexity, all depending on which state we're selling in and collecting from. This fractured status quo means consumers are often confused about what they can get 10 cents for. State-by-state variations hit SMEs the hardest, with many needing to either outsource CDS compliance or hire an additional employee to manage their CDS obligations, potentially driving up the cost to consumers. There's a growing consulting sector in CDS compliance, and to me, When consulting land exponentially grows, it's an indicator that something needs to be done. We often hear about something needs to be done, right? But what should be done, you might ask? The most effective EPR scheme has streamlined processes for those operating in it and for consumers. It has clear, simple rules, simple methods for levying payment, and transparent accounting. These are the hallmarks of success. Excuse me. Thank you to whoever made these bottles today. Beverage companies, as funders of the schemes, contrary to an outdated point of view, want high participation and high compliance with CDS. We have an extended producer responsibility. Containers carry our brands. Seeing them in a circular economy initiative buttresses our company's reputations. We want every container back. 100%, wouldn't that be lovely? And we're heavily invested in the success of CDS, not only through funding schemes, but investing in recycling facilities like the 2PET facilities in Altona and Albury. Beautiful, clean PET through Cleanaway that we're getting round around the circle 6 to 9 times as a bottle. It's a wonderful story. As I said, we're heavily invested in the success of CDS, but the industry does push back against unnecessary red tape and overburdening of businesses in the process. They simply raise costs and they frustrate the sustainability goals of a scheme. So for us, this is what best practice looks like. A single, nationally harmonised and administered CDS portal, housing registration, volume reporting, payments, auditing and dispute management. Gold standard would be the ability to key in the specs of the drink, key in the specs of the container, whether it's CDS eligible, where it's sold, and ideally it'd spit out a barcode, a CDS refund mark, register it in different jurisdictions, and bingo, beverage companies would be able to report sales volumes to schemes in a single place, receive a single invoice with every jurisdiction on it, due date, payments, receipts, all via the one portal. That seems aspirational, but if we're going to build a sustainable national circular manufacturing economy in Australia, efficient processes for CDS feedstock are truly essential. An added benefit of national coordination is a simpler process for transferring units between states, and making this process more transparent, improving fraud detection, and while a terrific benefit for the beverages industry, it's also beneficial for schemes and governments. We believe such a portal would facilitate more on-time payments into the schemes, which would benefit the entirety of our CDS system. It's clear the government, taking its cue from citizens' desires to have a cleaner environment, is looking to build a sustainable waste and resource recovery industry. We see a system which holds transparent data on collection and recovery rates, material sales, and the end destination of materials as an essential step in that journey. As we move into the future, we need to understand where our materials are ending up in order to obtain policies which deliver real incentives to the holders of recycled materials to retain and sell these materials onshore. With the incoming packaging and packaging waste regulation, PPWR, if you're into acronyms, in the EU, as well as the UN Plastics Treaty, which ABCL has been negotiating, we will only see a progressively increased global demand for recycled materials. Valuing these materials as commodities, as well as increasing transparency and understanding of material flows, can help the federal government enact policies in the best interest of our collective circular economy objectives. So that's the first CDS 2.0 we think could happen. The second, and I think far more exciting improvement to CDS, would allow us to future gaze, giving participants insight into how to maximise our extensive CDS infrastructure network to recover even more source-separated food-grade recycled materials. We are convinced that the most efficient and optimal way to collect more materials across Australia is to expand CDS to capture more packaging materials outside of beverage. It's too easy to look at the current collection rate and think that a refund of 20 cents will make a difference. I know there'll be a 20-cent discussion this next few days. We've done some work over the past few years that shows that 20 cents isn't such a motivator for Australians, especially when that 20 cents is added to their favourite drinks at the retail shelf. We found the magic number that would motivate Aussies is 80 cents to $1. But as with many things, what works well in theory fails when considered in reality. Imagine $1 added to a $1.79 bottle of water, or 20 bucks added to a slab of beer. There'd be pitchforks sharpened and marching in the streets, and probably another Senate inquiry, right? So why do parts of Europe have greater recovery rates? One of the problems we see over and over again is that high recovery rates in the EU are often analysed quite simplistically through a how large is the refund amount lens, when so many more factors influence return percentages. In Germany, for example, where you can't walk 50 steps without coming across another collection point, single-use plastic bottles are banned from landfill, and they attract really heavy fines should anyone attempt to dispose of them in landfill. Australia doesn't have a mandatory stick mechanism diverting containers from landfill, just the carrot of CDS. Moreover, those higher return rate countries often operate a return to retail model or models, where beverage retailers over a certain square footage must have a CDS collection point. And look at the density of return points in the EU. As I said, they're double or triple the amount of anything we see per capita here in Australia. In Germany, as I said, amazingly, everywhere there are CDS receptacles, and everyone drinks a drink and knows that in 5 seconds they're going to have another place to put it. Couple that with small, dense cities, and those systems embed more consumer convenience and lower operating cost. I always act on this assumption that everyone's lazy like me, and one of the things we hear when we talk to consumers, and we do talk to them in the streets, in the supermarkets, at collection points, we hear that convenience is the major factor. We want to do right, but we want it to be easy. Could be said across everything, right? It's really hard to extrapolate the European experience to Australia. But rather than a high refund for beverages, attaching a CDS refund to more items in the retail trolley, we believe will help to address the cost barrier and in turn increase return rates. So expanding CDS scope beyond beverage containers to wine, spirits and other large format beverages, which is already happening in Queensland, shows a shift to collecting containers is no longer simply relevant to litter reduction. It actually hasn't been for quite some time. But it's now integral to resource recovery and circularity. My sector encourages scope expansion as a logical next step in Australia's journey to true EPR and a more fully circular packaging sector. Beyond beverages, there's a wide variety of fast-moving consumer goods, things like Bunnings clamshells filled with screws and nails, that could be relatively easy collected in our existing material streams. Why couldn't every suitable PET, glass or aluminium container be recovered via CDS? With the move to design standards and de-engineering of packaging into mono-materials, it's time to begin planning and implementing an expansion based on available CDS infrastructure. Canned goods, glass jars and bottles, my favourite, the 100% recycled PET shampoo bottle paid for by my industry. And downcycled, I should say, into a shampoo bottle. All of these things, a variety of PET and HDPE containers, are just some categories which could expand the range of source-separated food-grade material travelling through Australia's circular economy. The benefits: lower waste to landfill, job creation in the recycling sector, and the growth of a new domestic industry really makes the expansion of CDS an easy choice. This expansion would do far more for collection rates across Australian materials than increasing the refund amount on beverages. When more than half of a consumer's retail trolley collects a 10-cent refund, the value of that trolley for the recovery sector will be higher than if 20 cents is applied to beverages alone. Probably this much of the retail trolley as opposed to this much. Expanding the range of items attracting a 10-cent refund does double duty. It drives consumer motivation to return and increases the amount of source-separated material that can be collected within CDS. It's more pragmatic to trigger multiple categories collection by a broad 10-cent incentive than increasing the refund amount with the uncertain goal of capturing the 30% of bottles and cans and liquid paperboard that currently goes to landfill. But easier said than done, right? We recognise it's not as easy as, let's go, pickle jar, you're heading to the CDS depot. There'd be plenty of work to do to understand the constraints of collection for RVMs, manual depots, home collect, and business and commercial collections. For example, could you easily separate by material and bale items from different categories, or would the execution be more complex and impact overall operational efficiency? Would some categories have adulterants or materials we would view as contamination that would need to be accounted for? Would these categories also utilise an eligible container factor, and how would you establish that rate between items? Could all of these considerations be wiped out by the integration of 2D barcodes? These questions just scratch the surface of what's possible, and we've been working to understand some of them as governments and schemes look to CDS 2.0. The beverage sector is proud that we have a unique, successful recovery system for our containers, and we recognise that it's far better for the circular economy if we spread the love and build on the return network to capture more of the most commonly used materials in similar categories. In one way or another, I bet that most of the people of this room have been burdened by Australia's famous tyranny of distance. But by using our already established transport and collection network that we have in CDS and applying CDS to other materials, it could leapfrog years of infrastructure development and move straight to the business of collection and reuse of materials. And we invite any category that's interested to join us. And you can also be known as an industry that is at the forefront of Australian circular economy. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
There's no questions online. Does anyone have any quick questions for Cathy?
Thanks, Cathy, for your presentation. I represent a regional council in the middle of Australia, 260 square kilometres, 13 communities, 5,500 people. I can guarantee you all your products are still out there. The tyranny of distance you mentioned, the head bodies need to work on how people in regional and remote areas can actually get their product back to the system. It is a huge problem. It grows by the day. As the Outback Way opens, people travel it. We just don't have the capabilities to do it, but there's lots of 10 cents have gone into the Northern Territory's bucket that is not being spent on recovery. How do we address that?
So we've had a number of discussions with the Northern Territory government. I realise the limitations. I mean, you've essentially just got CDS in some areas and no curbside in most of the areas, and then there's all these vast spaces where there's pretty much nothing. And I think some of the learnings we've had in Queensland could be applied to your remote area, and I would strongly suggest you talk to Natalie Roach, and I'm happy to talk to you as well about some of the things we've found about ways to encourage those small communities. We've got some beautiful First Nations CDS collection points that have given those very remote communities in far north Queensland not only training, jobs, some money from CDS, and a purpose in those small communities. So I'd love to continue the discussion with you. But Northern Territory, I think once that new MRF gets up and running, we might see some changes, hopefully. Yeah. Thank you.
Our next speaker is James Dorney. James is the CEO of the Cleanaway TOMRA JV, who is the network operator for all of New South Wales, and as of November 2023, also for a third of Victoria. And James is going to share, his paper is about partnerships with a purpose, so a slightly different tack.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's James Dorney, CEO of TOMRA Cleanaway, and appreciate the opportunity to present today. And you almost got it round the right way, TOMRA Cleanaway, close. All right, TOMRA Cleanaway is a joint venture between the ASX-listed Cleanaway business and the Norwegian-listed company TOMRA. And as Anne mentioned, we are the network operator for New South Wales since late 2017. And since late last year, we've been a network operator for the West Zone of the Victorian CDS. So today, the topic that I'll be speaking on, and I'll be trying to stick to script, although at some point I might respond to some of these concepts around 2.0. I'll stick to script, which is partnerships with purpose. We'll have a chat later. Partnerships with purpose, delivering a meaningful container deposit scheme. And I guess one of the key messages there is that there's just so many benefits that can be delivered and driven from a well-designed, well-operated container deposit scheme, be it on the economic, the environmental, or the social side of things. And I think today I'll be predominantly focusing in on the New South Wales experience with some comments in reference to what we've seen so far in Victoria, but predominantly around New South Wales. So here we go. Oh yes, it's working. So fantastic. So in terms of my presentation today, what I'll do is I'll just briefly touch on some of the operational achievements in New South Wales, some of what's been achieved to date. Again, I'll mention in brief some of what we've seen in Victoria before moving on to the bulk of this presentation, which relates to some of the great stories around social enterprises, charity and community groups, and some of the benefits that have flowed in that regard. But it's very, very interesting to listen about some of the views of Cathy and Australian Beverages Council. I mean, we are absolutely supportive of a network operator around scheme expansion. We do feel there's great opportunities for harmonisation. Whenever I hear about harmonisation, I remember a comment that was once made to me by a minister in the New South Wales government who said, for as long as there are mountains in Switzerland, there are going to be states in Australia doing different things. So, look, I don't think the mountains in Switzerland are going anywhere soon. So in terms of harmonisation, it's a bit like how long is a piece of string. I think there's definite benefits there in terms of the easing the front end and some of that administrative burden. As a network operator in both New South Wales and Victoria, in New South Wales we manage a definition of a container that can enter the scheme as an eligible container. If in Victoria, it is a suitable eligible container, and there is a difference. So all of these little things that do add up to this concept of harmonisation, mandates for certain buildings and what have you, hosting collection points, big tick, driving the circular economy, absolutely. I think that we may have a discussion around deposit values. I think, look, why don't we just give 20 cents a chance? I'm not advocating for 80 cents. But if we're not comfortable with 20 cents, why not 25 cents? That seems even better and a bit closer to 80 cents. But look, these are all part of discussions. And not surprisingly, there are different views held on how to lift the deposit, the rates of return across these schemes. And I think that another very important consideration is ensuring that only recyclable containers, genuinely recyclable containers, are in container deposit schemes. Because the second question that I always get asked after why aren't wine and spirit bottles included is, yeah, but is it really recycled? And one of those, we need to make sure at the front end that those non-recyclable materials aren't included. But look, back to, again, the performance that we have delivered and with the great support of the citizens of New South Wales, we're coming up towards 11.5 billion containers that have been returned through the network since the scheme started in December 2017, so a little over six and a half years. What does that equate to? That equate, for the first time last year, we had 2 billion containers in a calendar year returned through the network in New South Wales. This financial year, which is coming up at the end of June, we expect that that number will be 2.2 to 2.3 billion through the New South Wales network. So that's not including the MRF returns, that's just through the network. We've seen growth rates around 8 to 8.5% against prior year in terms of returns. That's been driven somewhat by a return in the overall growth of the drinks market, but obviously more and more people participating, returning more and more containers at that 2.3 billion. And one thing that as TOMRA Cleanaway as network operator is one of the core competencies that we bring to the table is that every single bottle and can that enters the scheme is scanned. And it's not just scanned for the barcode, it's scanned to actually read that it is also an eligible or a suitable eligible container, reading all the dimensions of that bottle. And that gives a very real feed, live feed of data in real time for reporting, but also very important around audit and verification and compliance. The key message here today, before I move on to some of the stories about the partnerships with purpose, is that The greater the rate of return, the greater the volume, that leads to all those downstream benefits, whether it be the economics of it, the environmental outcomes. We mentioned the great impact that's been had around litter reduction, driving the circular economy, the opportunities for community groups, for social enterprises to participate. The greater the rates of return, the higher the volumes that are getting driven through these schemes, clearly the greater the opportunity for those economic, environmental and social benefits further down the line. So in New South Wales, we have over 620 collection points across the state, and that's a metric that people like to use, a collection point, but collection points aren't created equally. TOMRA Cleanaway, one of our driving principles is around convenience, it's around accessibility, it's around ease of use. And so networks tend to be measured on number, but an automated collection point that's open 7 days a week, at 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. is very, very different to, say, a manual collection point that's open 4 to 8 hours a week, but they all tend to be counted in the collection point column. So what's always important to remember is that there are differences between collection points in terms of convenience and accessibility. The higher the convenience, the greater the accessibility, the more likely people are to use a scheme. Because it is not up for debate that Australia does have a very low deposit value by global standards. When you couple that with the fact that we have quite expensive drink prices compared to global standards, very high GDP per capita, it's a simple fact of the matter that a 10-cent deposit value is not a motivator for a lot of people. Up on the screen there we have some of the examples of kiosks, of stores and of bulk depots that we operate across New South Wales. What we have found is that as we've gone through the journey as a network operator is that in terms of some of those higher density demographics, higher socio-economic advantage demographics, it has been quite difficult to penetrate in terms of automated collection points. So another one of our core drivers is around innovation and technology. So what we've brought is new types of collection points into New South Wales and taken some of these models into Victoria also, such as automated collection points which are store or centre-based, reverse vending centres that you see there, mobile collection points, and we've designed solutions for basements that you can see up on the screen there, which is actually a cut-down version of a kiosk to allow that to fit inside a basement. And this again is all about that key principle about convenience, accessibility, knowing that the higher the volumes, the more benefit that can be driven on multiple different fronts. And just as an example, in New South Wales, the gentleman over here talked about regional access. Well, we're very passionate about ensuring that accessibility there's equity of access across the whole state. As network operator, we've got collection points as far west as Broken Hill, all the way from the Queensland border down to Victoria. And likewise in our Victorian zone, we've ensured that there's very wide coverage with a focus on automation and technology. And you can see there, these are installs that we've undertaken in the last year or so. We've continued to grow and expand the network with a focus on automation, locations such as Weewar. Recently, we've opened depots in Orange and Griffith, both operated by charities and community groups. And some examples there are some of the smaller automated machines that we brought out from TOMRA in Norway that have really unlocked some of those smaller geographies, such as Thredbo, Murray Bateman, Northern Beaches, Warriewood being a classic example of Northern Beaches of New South Wales. Small number of shopping centres, very tightly concentrated, high property values, so we've looked for smaller automated machines to give access to citizens in that area. So back to the overall benefit of and what can be delivered. Michelle has always instructed me about the triple bottom line, so I get a gold star on the collar from Michelle for mentioning that. But as I said before, a well-designed, well-operated CDS, as well as collecting a lot of containers, can deliver multiple benefits, both communities, the economics of people returning those and what that might drive to the wider community, particularly when social enterprises and charity and community groups are involved. And let's not forget the environmental benefit. Just in terms of recycling, I've got my little prop here, which is a Coolridge bottle, 100% recycled plastic bottle. It then has a small asterisk, which immediately gets you worried, but goodness me, this print's small. But it actually says the cap and label, the PET. And why I've brought this up here is that this is PET that's been collected through a container deposit scheme, probably most likely New South Wales. It's gone into the circular plastics plant in Albury. It's been turned into flake or pellet, turned back into a PET bottle. So I have the circular economy in my hand here. which is very exciting. And you quoted the fact that it might get reused 9 times. I've already refilled this bottle 6 times, so that's 15 uses we're getting out of this. And if I refill it a few more times, we might get 20 out of it. So isn't that a fantastic story? Thank you. Okay, so that's probably going to be a highlight of the conference for everyone. This is a famous bottle. Yes, okay, but the lids are recycled, by the way. The labels aren't, that's another story. So look, in terms of circularity, in both Victoria and New South Wales, our contract with government as network operator says that everything that gets returned must be recycled. And we're very passionate about ensuring that these are going to high-end recycling applications, so a very, very high grade of commodity being generated. And you can see the numbers up there on the screen, that over 750,000 tonnes have been recycled through the network since scheme commencement. You can see there that all of that glass in New South Wales is going back into bottles and jars. The story there around PET in New South Wales all going down to circular plastics in Albury, so has the capacity to handle 1,600,000 drink containers, getting a very high yield out of that product, is going back into drink containers and food containers, and the aluminium in very clean, in high demand on global markets. So this really is, as Cathy pointed out, is the circular economy in action, and we're seeing the story's changed actually in 5 or 6 years. If we'd stood up here 4 or 5 years ago, I would not have been able to tell that same story about glass and PET. That was being sent offshore because in New South Wales we just did not have the capacity and the capability to handle that on such scale and in such volume, and how that story has changed. So in New South Wales, in terms of partnerships, we have seen over $54 million be generated by charities, community groups and social enterprises since scheme commencement. That's a big number. And involves well over 1,000 registered donation partners across the scheme. And those fees are being generated by charities and community groups who are operating collection points, as an example. Might be an automated depot, might be an over-the-counter collection point. But that doesn't go to the what we call the hidden, I've heard people in government refer to it as the modern-day sausage sizzle, which is the bottle collection drive at the local sports club or school or what have you, that is returned through informal channels. This is what we know in terms of payments to operators that are social enterprises, and the formal donations through RVMs, through reverse vending machines or through the app. So it's quite a significant number that's been generated since scheme commencement. There's just an idea of some of the many different communities and charity groups which are involved in New South Wales, and we have a similar number involved in Victoria. In Victoria, we have rolled out nearly 200 collection points. We were very pleased to celebrate 200 million collections within 6 months of commencement. And as an example, all of the depots that we're responsible for in Victoria are operated by charities and community groups, which is something that we were very proud of. So as an example, in terms of just a few short stories around some of the partnerships with purpose that we've built in New South Wales, Resource Recovery Australia is a not-for-profit social enterprise based on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. They started in the scheme as an over-the-counter collection point. They transitioned into a depot in 2018, have been a wonderful partner, providing a great service to that mid-north coast community there, based on Foster and Tuncurry and beyond, but with a target on employment for local folks. Long-term unemployed, they have Indigenous folks being employed by that organisation, and other people who might otherwise be challenged to find employment. And a really fantastic story, which is all on the back of this container deposit scheme in New South Wales, opening up job opportunities. And an example of this, which really puts it all in perspective, really, is the story of Liam, which, fingers crossed, the video will work. Yes, here we go.
It's a big eye-opener, seeing all thousands and thousands of bottles and cans get recycled every day. No, it's not out in the streets or the beach or the land. It's clean up the country, really. It's going to be a process, but I can see it getting bigger and bigger. I'm Liam Simon, I'm from Walmart country. I grew up in Foster all my life. I've been working here at Resource Recovery Australia, return and earn, for about a year. So this is a collection area for the region, pretty much between Foster, Taree, mid-north coast you could say, really. So when we have our busy days, we collect about 30,000 bottles and cans every day. Working here has really changed me. It changed me for the better. I like waking up every morning, going to my job. Not everyone goes to their job happy with what they got, and I'm happy where I'm at. The reason I came to Return and Earn, because I got given an opportunity and I was keen to learn more skills and I'd like to be more involved in the community. What motivates people is just that they get money out of it. Now there's a price to it, now everyone feels more off to do it now. The machine itself is very eye-catchy, and just knowing that my country's getting cleaned up properly and going back to its old ways, looking back at its old ways, and yeah, just knowing that I'm a part of it, and I really enjoy it. I reckon I'll be here for a while yet.
So that's Liam's story as part of resource recovery up there in Tuncurry. Fantastic story, and all of the employees on that site have similar stories. Another great example of partnerships with purpose is in relation to the partnership that TOMRA Cleanaway and Vinnie's have built in New South Wales. Vinnie's now operate 10 automated depots across the state of New South Wales out of the 45 in total that are operated, the bulk depots. And again, such a wonderful fit. If you talk to the senior leaders at Vinnie's, this is a means to generate funds for Vinnie's to do their real work, which is supporting their local communities, helping people in need, and has been very significant in firstly raising the profile of Vinnie's, but also generating some very important funds for that work that Vinnie's does, but also another one of their key measures and key metrics about generating employment, because these are all Vinnie's employees operating those facilities. So the Vinnie's story is quite remarkable. They started with two depots at scheme commencement. The depots down there in the south of Sydney in Wollongong and Shoalhaven. And you can see there how this partnership with Vinnie's has expanded across the whole state. They are all locations where Vinnie's operate automated depots. So we contract that operation as the network operator to Vinnie's, as far west as Griffith and Dubbo, as far north as Tweed Heads, down there in Wagga in the Riverina. And we're seeing this being very, very beneficial to those local communities in terms of job creation. Obviously, all of that product that gets captured gets recycled, but also generating very, very valuable funds for Vinnie's to do the good work that they do in the community, and also allowing their boss to ring me consistently saying, when can we open another depot? So, but a fantastic partnership we built with Vinnie's. And just a little one quickly, last week I had the opportunity to be a part of the official launch of a campaign across the entire network for Little Wings, being an amazing charity that, to be honest, I wasn't quite aware of, which provides air flights and ground transport to children in regional and remote New South Wales who need to access specialised care in Sydney hospitals. So we're aiming to raise 100,000 across the donations across the New South Wales network. It's very, very simple to do. When you go to an RVM kiosk, you can actually just press the button and donate your funds. You can do it through the app. I think the public is already showing a very, very strong inclination to donate for this wonderful charity. But again, these type of campaigns are available across the New South Wales scheme because of the ease of participation, because of the ease of making that donation at an RVM kiosk, which are covered across the entire state, and number in the range of 340. So very easy to participate to make those donations. And what we've seen with these charity and community donations across the scheme is some quite significant funds being raised over the journey. The Donate for a Mate raised nearly $100,000. We had a similar campaign where all of the donations at kiosks and through the app went to the Starlight Children's Foundation. I had the great pleasure there of presenting a big cheque. I don't know if anyone's presented a big cheque before, but if you haven't done it, you should seek it. It really gives you that really wonderful, warm feeling, particularly when you're giving $122,544 to the Starlight Children's Foundation. And that was, I believe, that year the most significant one-off donation they'd received. So again, coming back to this key message around what can be delivered by a well-designed, well-operated CDS. It's beyond bottles being recycled, or that's a key metric. It's cleaned up the environment, but it can deliver such wonderful opportunities for charities and community groups and for people that are involved who are quite often coming from a disadvantaged or difficult background. And that's probably really one of the great things that I love about this scheme and being involved in container deposit schemes across Australia. Thank you. There's the famous bottle.
Thank you, James, very, very much. And my apologies for getting the TOMRA Cleanaway intro wrong. Thank you. Our next speaker is Natalie Roach, who is the current CEO of the Queensland COEX Container Exchange Program. And Natalie's going to share the journey that they've been on in expanding their program to be the first state in Australia to include glass, wine and spirit containers. So maybe 1.5 on your journey to 0.20.
Thanks, Anne, and thanks to Cathy and James for their presentations this morning, and thank you to you all for being here. It's great to be here. As Anne said, my name is Natalie Roach, and I'm the CEO of Container Exchange, the organisation that runs the container deposit scheme up in Queensland, Containers for Change. So as Anne said, and as many of you will know, back in November last year, Queensland became the first state in Australia to include wines and spirits bottles in its container refund scheme, making them eligible for a 10-cent refund for the first time. So it's great to be here today. James has obviously just talked a little bit about container deposit or container refund schemes and how they work. And I'd just like to share with you a little bit of our learnings and our insights in terms of how we expanded the scheme to include those containers. Before I do that, though, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we meet and also acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. So, opportunity and challenge. So let me start by sharing a bit about COEX. So COEX, or Container Exchange, is appointed by the Queensland Government to run, as I said, the state's container refund scheme, Containers for Change. I think one of the key differences up in Queensland is that we're actually a not-for-profit ourselves, so we're not a for-profit organisation, we are not-for-profit, so all of the funds that come into the scheme are reinvested back into what we do on a day-to-day basis. And we're really there, and James called out again that triple bottom line, but to make sure that we're focusing on the social, the environmental and the economic benefits for Queensland, and particularly for those for the community. And our network really does expand right across the state. So for the gentleman that asked the question right at the start, we operate refund points right up in the Torres Strait on Bardew Island, up in the tip of Cape York at a place called Newmapoon, out west in Birdsville, and then right through southeast corner down to the New South Wales border. So it really is a broad-reaching scheme with over 360 refund points currently right across the state. And to run such a scheme across such a broad range of geographies and with such diversity requires quite a lot of innovation, and it certainly requires a lot of collaboration to get things happening. And I think when the Queensland Government announced the change to the scheme, that probably put us in as much of a good state as we could be to really accept that challenge to expand the range of eligible containers. And I'm sure, as you can imagine, expanding any business to change the way you do things, change your operating model is absolutely massive, and it takes an awful lot of work and creativity to overcome those challenges on a day-to-day basis. So what I'll do is share some of the stories of how the Containers for Change team partnered with our network to make sure that come the 1st of November, which also coincidentally was our 5th birthday, so we were hoping to celebrate 2 big milestones on the 1st of November, but how we worked to get ready for that change and make sure that it really was a seamless go-live date. So, Queenslanders are really nothing but competitive. So we've got Origin coming up. I won't ask show of hands, given we're in New South Wales. I guess I can hedge my bets on who the favourite side would be. But it was really with great pride that we received the news that Queensland would be the first state in the country to expand the container refund scheme to include the glass, wine and spirits bottles. But it was not something that we were able to do alone. There were some really key stakeholder groups that we had to work with right across the readiness stages and ready for go live. So Queensland State Government being one of them, beverage manufacturers, container refund point operators, as I mentioned, over 360 refund point operations across the state, then our customers and also our broader range of stakeholders. So it was through that collaboration that we made sure that come 1 November, we were 100% ready to go live, and we were then able to celebrate not just the one milestone, but also our 5th birthday with a big smile on the day. So I hope that by sharing some of our experiences, we can give some real insight into the other schemes and really help them on their journey as well, because we know that here in New South Wales, in WA and so on across the state, the schemes are considering that expansion to include wines and spirits. I think it's almost like James and I had the same script in some ways, because, you know, the first question that I was always asked when I started in my role was, why don't you do wines and spirits? And the second question, which is now the first question for us here in Queensland, up in Queensland, is everything recycled? It's not really, is it? So it was really with great interest that Queenslanders kind of wanted to explore that opportunity to get wines and spirits bottles into the scheme. The scheme's been in existence now for coming up 6 years, and in that time, Queenslanders have really, really got that bug for recycling. They really love Containers for Change, they love the scheme, and they love what it stands for, because one of the key purposes of our scheme is that it's for Queenslanders. So they were really, really keen and champing at the bit to make sure that wines and spirits were included. But it was something that the Queensland Government really had to test the appetite for before it all went live. So the government launched a consultation process back in November 2022, reaching out to not just Queenslanders, but also to beverage manufacturers and other key stakeholders to really gauge interest in expanding the scheme. So they tested the appetite for wines and spirits, but also things like cask wines and pure milk bottles, because we wanted to make sure that Queenslanders were able to have their say and that we were really able to respond to the needs of our customers. And it was really interesting because you might think, surely there'd be big support for milk bottles and, I don't know how many people drink cask wine, but cask wine drinkers you think would be saying, great, put that in the scheme. But it was actually the wines and spirits bottles that got the most support. So an overwhelming 98% of 6,600 survey respondents said, yes, please, we want wines and spirits in. But interestingly, the numbers weren't so high for some of those other material types. So it was with the 98% standing firmly behind them that the Queensland Government announced that from 1 November 2023, the scheme would be expanded to include wines and spirits. Hopefully it works.
In an Australian first, Queensland is adding glass bottles to the container refund scheme. From November, you'll be able to cash in your empty wine and spirit bottles for 10 cents a pop.
When we did the survey, over 98% of Queenslanders told us they wanted to see this change, and what this will ultimately mean is more money back in the pockets of Queenslanders, of charities, not-for-profit organisations, and better recycling.
More than 6.4 billion containers have been exchanged since the program was launched in 2018, refunding more than $630 million.
Now, how do we prepare for it? Well, it might seem simple, right? At the moment, back in November, the container refund scheme accepted glass beer bottles, glass soft drink bottles. So how hard could it be adding glass wine and spirits bottles? But actually, it's actually pretty complex. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we had to do to make that become more real. It's not just receive more glass, pay more refunds, recycle more material. There's a whole lot of work that has to go on behind the scenes to make that happen. And Cathy alluded to that in her presentation when she talks about expanding CDS even further. When you think about product registration, for example, imagine if we had to register every single product in the supermarket that came in a glass container. I mean, the volume would be massive. I wouldn't even like to put a number on it. But for glass wines and spirits, that was a challenge in its own right as well. We had to engage with a wide range of different stakeholder groups to make sure that we were ready to offer seamless service from 1 November 2023. And the three key stakeholder groups that I'll focus on are our beverage manufacturers, our refund point operators, and our customers. And just to give you some insight, we had to try and register in a very short time over 2,000 wine and spirits manufacturers in Australia. We had to make sure that our network of 360 refund point operators could accept all of that new material. All of our material has to be an eligible container, so there were some legislative requirements that came with that. And then we needed to make sure that our customers were fully briefed and fully aware of what was in and how they could go about it and make sure it all happened from the 1st of November. So if I start with our beverage manufacturers, making sure they were onboarded and their products were registered was going to be absolutely crucial to our success on day one. In addition to the sheer number of those manufacturers joining our scheme, wineries and distilleries had never been involved in CDS before. So we knew there were a lot of people out there, a lot of organisations out there, some large, some very small businesses that we would need to help and support and engage with to make sure they were ready and aware and able to onboard into the scheme. We needed to provide them context in particular around the legislative requirements and what it meant for them and how they did business. So there were 5 key support mechanisms that we put in place to make their experience as easy as possible. The first one was investing heavily in our registration portal. And again, Cathy touched on this earlier. Each state has a slightly different process for registration, which can cause some challenges. And it's certainly something that we as scheme operators are very, very mindful of. To support our wineries and distilleries, we've also set up a dedicated outbound call centre, and we used commercially available databases to make outbound calls to more than 2,000 wine and spirits producers to make sure they were aware of the change in coming to Queensland, and as I said before, what it meant for them, and to really help them and engage with them and support them in participating in Containers for Change. We also built a multi-channel education and engagement plan, and that was launched really with the mindset of providing accurate and timely information to beverage manufacturers in formats that they could easily access. And that included an online information portal, and we also ran a series of weekly webinars so that those manufacturers could jump in and talk to us at any point along the journey. And we also set up a dedicated inquiry line for our beverage manufacturer team. We also made some improvements to our product registration process to make sure that the upload of bulk numbers of barcodes was enabled, and that we enabled manufacturers to use a single type barcode for multi-varietals of a similar shape and size, as some of the feedback that we'd got from wines and spirits manufacturers was, if you think about it, I might make the same wine in a 2021 vintage or 2022, and it's all the same apart from the year that it was produced, so help us out here. So creating ways to innovate and make things easier for the wine and spirits industry was really, really key for us. And we also negotiated with some of the big alcohol retail chains in the country, such as the Endeavour Group, to gain access to their databases, because they quite often, we found, acted on behalf of some of those smaller manufacturers. So again, we were very much able to ease the burden on the industry to try and make sure that as we worked to that 1 November 23 go live, everybody was well prepared and well set up. And just to give you some insight, before the 1st of November last year, we had around 33,000 product barcodes registered in the Queensland scheme. That figure is now more than 70,000. And if you think about the fact that some of those represent more than one actual product, it tells you the size and scale of the wine and spirits industry in this country, because it's simply massive. And then lastly, one of the other changes that we made working with government was to introduce a new category of what we called micro-beverage manufacturer. And that was for those small producers that made less than 100,000 units a year. And we made some changes to the reporting and administration requirements to help ease the burden on small business in the wine and spirits sector. We then moved on to our refund point operators. So they are, in essence, the face of Containers for Change up in Queensland. Whether they're running a full service depot, whether it was a bag drop service, home collection, we just wanted to make sure that everything was as smooth, as seamless as possible come 1 November. Our team worked side by side with our operators, large and small, to make sure equally that they were prepared. As I mentioned before, we invested in the back-end systems working with our beverage manufacturers, and that enabled readiness for our operators to make sure they knew what they were accepting and how to accept it. We launched a suite of education and marketing tools, designed, produced and shipped out right across the state to help give our operators all of the information at hand to engage with their customers and make sure they were as ready as they could be. We wanted to give a best on-ground experience on the 1st of November. And then importantly for us, we worked with a range of volume forecasting models to identify the expected volume of additional glass that we could expect to take on board from that 1st of November go-live date. And that was particularly important when you think of the safety element of what we do, and particularly in regard to things like the heavy vehicle national legislation, which requires loads to be effectively managed and puts a real impetus on us to make sure that we are aware of and managing the weight of the loads that we're transporting. And then we also partnered with some of our other operators and technology providers, TOMRA being one of them, to make sure that our RVMs were also set up for success. So our reverse vending self-service kiosks were also set up for success. Because what we didn't want on the day of going live was people turning up to one of our automated solutions, popping in their wine or spirit bottle and it's spitting it back out, because that would have been a massive fail from our perspective. So making sure that we were ready in terms of operations was absolutely fundamental. And then for our customers, we made sure as well that we had a really strong education and awareness campaign out in market in the lead up to go live on the 1st of November. And kept it short and sweet, and I'll just play for you now the first video that we shared to raise awareness in Queensland.
Cheers to Baz, who'll soon cash in on his Shiraz. And cheers to Lynn, who returns her tonic and soon her gin. Cheers to it nearly being time to make change on spirits and wine.
So that was one of our short and sweet and slightly cheeky marketing campaigns in the lead up to go live. We then changed the messaging just ever so slightly in November to make sure that all wine and spirits drinkers could know that their containers were now eligible for a refund.
Cheers to Jane for making change from her champagne. And cheers to Callum, who earns a tidy sum from his rum. Cheers to wine and spirits joining the range of Containers for Change. And when you think about it, 360 operations across the state, that's a lot. To
Put that into context for you, we have more operations in Queensland than McDonald's do. So it's a really, really sizable and diverse operation. So making sure that those stakeholder groups were prepped and ready was absolutely key. So when it came to November the 1st, the months of preparation, collaboration and engagement with our stakeholders, thankfully, paid off. Our operators on the day reported that their services and their technology worked as they'd intended. Our logistics run were well managed and we were able to manage the extra volume super smoothly and without any incident. And most importantly of all, our customers were super excited to be coming to our depots and our facilities with their wines and containers, wine and spirits containers, and were delighted to be earning even more money for their refunds than they were before. And perhaps for us, the biggest sort of summary of success was that it was really actually just like any other day at Containers for Change. And we take that as a really good news story. And somewhat, it was a bit of an anticlimax because all of the hard work, preparation and operational readiness activities we'd put into place had actually paid off to no end. And it was a smooth day and it went really without a hitch. So from our perspective, we were just super pleased with how the day went. And here's a few snippets from that day. So 7 months on and we're in the new normal. Wines and spirits are a well-embedded part of the Containers for Change scheme in Queensland. So what are we seeing? We are seeing continued year-on-year growth in our glass collections, and they're following the general seasonal trends of our overall return rate. In fact, we've seen in the first 5 months of wines and spirits a 12.2% increase in glass volumes through our refund point network, and we're eagerly awaiting the updates from our MRF collections and also understanding the diversion from landfill, which are some results that are pending and we'll hopefully have in the next kind of couple of months. So BAU, glass, wines and spirits are there. So what have we learnt? Well, as I've said before, ongoing engagement with stakeholders is critical, and that's not just relating to the expansion of wine and spirits. As you'll all know, that's really, really key for any major business change. Making sure that your operators have got the capacity and are well equipped to respond to the change has been essential, and our operators have just taken that well within their stride. Educating and facilitating awareness for both stakeholders and, again, customers, super critical to business change. And then what it's really enabled for us is the ability to explore new markets for our material. And in Queensland, around 70% of all scheme glass was recycled into bottles last year, and it's something that we continue to explore and expand as we move forward. It's a really key opportunity for us and really exciting to be here as well because there are some new markets that we're able to explore as part of this conference today. So what's next for us? Well, as I said, scheme expansion is really part of BAU. We are continuing to hone our strategy. We're continuing to drive the social, economic and environmental benefits of the scheme, working with many different charity and community group partners to make sure that we are really maximising the benefit of the scheme for Queenslanders. And we're super invested in driving and understanding the behavioural changes that we're able to deliver and to support to make sure that more and more Queenslanders are participating in the scheme. And we're going to do all of that by making sure that we focus on our vision for the future, which is ensuring that no container goes to waste. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. And our last speaker in this panel is Stephen Sergi, who is the Manager of Circular Economy and Waste at the South Australian EPA. And I just Googled South Australia introduced CDS in 1977. So what were the rest of us doing for a long time? Stephen's going to talk about harmonisation and how we're going to get there.
Thanks, Anne. Good morning, everybody. So, as Anne said, we've had it for over 40 years, and the bit that always, I think sometimes we miss the point, we always focus on return rates, but when you consider how many containers have been returned, we're talking billions and billions of containers over that time. The more recent CDSs have massive scale, massive population. We had last year over 660 million containers returned through the South Australian CDS, but when you, I know they're not exactly the right numbers, but when you go over 40 years, that is a lot of containers which are returned. So my presentation today, and okay, no dramas, I'll pad it out, no worries. I'll talk to, I'll start just with a bit of an intro, but so Manager in Circular Economy and Waste was my substantive role in the EPA. I'm acting Director of Science and Systems at the moment. But our journey regarding reforming our South Australian CDS began since, I think it was 2016, funnily enough, and it is like a relay is probably the best way to describe it. We asked everybody what should the scope of our review be, and based on that scope, we then put out a discussion paper, which was led by myself, or I was the project manager, with a massive team behind it, because it's a lot of skill. And even though our CDS is quite organic in it's driven by the market, it's surprisingly complex when you look behind the scenes. It's not simply 10 cents returned and I return my container. But behind the scenes and behind the gate, so to speak, systems are massive and complicated and not easily understood. You learn every time I looked at it, I learnt, and I wish I knew whatever it was that I learnt that day 6 months ago. So lots of reiterations and lots of discussions. And we also mapped out our material flow, and I just wanted to highlight our CDS glass is over 98% is returned back to bottle. At the MRFs it was a lower at 11%, but they've made significant, MRFs in South Australia have made significant investment in the recent years, so they are performing much, much better. And all of those materials are diverted for landfill. So I'd like to just ensure we don't underestimate the value of that higher order recovery and the simple principle of source segregation all the way through the system is really what drives that high performance rate. So anyway, back to my presentation. I also have an acknowledgement to country. I won't read that out, we've done it a few times, but I do want to acknowledge and pay my respects to the elders past and present. This is just a reference slide, so the actual summary paper for the behavioural study is available on our website, and this was a cross-jurisdictional behavioural study. Other jurisdictions may also have it on their website, but we've also asked them to reference ours. There's two parts to it. One, there's a summary document. This is just a nice sort of infographic which people can reference. And it really is the key points which were approved by HEPA to put out and publicise. The actual behavioural study in itself was quite a massive document and a really big undertaking, but that is not for public consultation, public availability. It is really for government to help inform their policy decisions. So just to give you an idea, this is where it all started. So if people don't know, that is a TikTok star named Nathan. And he is convenient today, but he was vibing to a Fleetwood Mac song, Dreams, and drinking Ocean Breeze, which is effectively cranberry juice, right? That's when this all started, and I thought it was a great date stamp. Sorry. Thanks. I thought it was a great date stamp just to give people a bit of perspective of how these complicated and cross-jurisdictional issues take time. So in 2020, heads of EPA, so HEPA as we refer them to, agreed to procure a container deposit scheme behaviour change national research study. And the idea was there's lots of discussion about how would you change CDSs and how would you get that improvement. And we heard today, like, increase the refund amount, that'll make a difference. Increase the number of eligible containers, that'll make a difference. Increase the scope, i.e. the different types of containers that will come in, that'll also make a difference. Increase the return points, that'll make a difference. But the reality is which of those will make the most difference for the level of investment you put into it, and which of those do you choose to drive policy to make that change. So that's where this all started. And we also recognise it is about optimising and aligning the participation in CDS across Australia. Every jurisdiction has a CDS now, and it's about how do you make that happen and make that work. So it's easy for people to understand. So in recognition of that work, Environment Ministers in April 2021 agreed and supported harmonising CDS across Australia, Australian jurisdictions, and they focused on a timeframe of 2025. You need a time to work towards, otherwise things just sort of linger. The key areas they focused on were containers, size and products, refund amounts, standards for labelling and community education. And just, I also put that picture up there. Nathan, for his efforts, got a new ute, well, an SUV. He also got, I'm assuming, a lifetime supply of Ocean Breeze, I'm not sure. But the bit that fascinates me the most, he put up for auction his non-fungible token, i.e. his video, and the starting bids were $500,000. It's crazy. I don't know what it sold for, maybe nothing, but it's a good story anyway. So I just thought, look at the world. It's a very different world to what we're used to. So South Australia led, on behalf of HEPA, we led the procurement of this, the national research, and there's 4 key areas involved. One was the current perceptions of understanding of the CDSs in communities, and that's both within communities that have, or jurisdictions that have a CDS and those that don't. It was also the current participation in CDS, so how many people participate and why do they participate, and that leads on to the influencing factors. Why do you participate? And what are those different factors that sway CDS-related behaviours? So they were the 4 main areas. And from that, there was quite a bit of work. They developed 3 key segments. I mean, you could always have 1,000,001 segments, but they developed 3 key segments, and they surveyed 1,803 individuals across Australia. And what they come up with was consistent users, and they use a 12-month time period here just to make things a little bit easier. But across the 12 months, consistent users, which were the majority of people that they surveyed, and it wasn't by choice, it just happened to be that way, they regularly returned containers in the last 12 months. You had irregular users, which were 21%, and they sometimes returned their containers to CDS in the last 12 months, and you have your never returned, and this is why the 12 months is important. The never returned did not return containers in the last 12 months, but it doesn't mean they hadn't done it years before. So it's just important to point that out, because there's a slide where it sort of doesn't make sense about a never return having an opinion about a return point. So I thought I'd just point that out. So they also looked into what makes a consistent user. Why are they a consistent user? And they had 3 key points which came out of it. 4 key points. One was a strong environmental motivation. They are really motivated to do good for the environment. And actually, and sometimes originally they called them a do-gooder. And I thought that's probably not the wrong connotation, because most people have quite a strong environmental motivation. You don't necessarily have to be a do-gooder to be that. It could be just part of your routine life. So they have a strong environmental motivation. They also have a good knowledge and understanding about CDS. They've built their returns around their routine. And this one's, I think, quite important. And I recognise we have different return points across jurisdictions, but in South Australia, our return points are still the traditional depot where it's staffed by a person, whether it's Nugget still running it for the past 40 years, or Bazza, or whatever it is, or Julie even these days. They're all changing, but they always reported positive experience about their return points. So, it made it easy for them to come back, and they liked it. The irregular user had a moderate environmental motivation. They were unsure of the difference between curbside and CDS, and the difference there is that if participating in CDS meant you returned, in this context, meant you returned your containers to a return point. If you put it in your curbside, that wasn't really counted as participating in CDS. And I know there's different models across jurisdictions about what's in and what's out and how that works, but in this context, that's the way it worked. And they were also not clear on which containers are included under the CDS. So they had a general idea, but there's some nuances in there. And if people, I'm not going to give you the answer, but who thinks Ocean Breeze is included in CDS? I'm not going to tell you, so you have to look it up. But that gives you a thing where people, when you think about it, you go, oh, when I return my containers, I just think of a Coke can and I return the Coke can. I actually don't check the label anymore. You just assume it's still in. And because you've had a massive influx or a change in consumer behaviours and the types of containers that are coming into the schemes or available for purchase, it's not as simple as it used to be. The irregular users recounted poor experiences at return points. So it wasn't great. It's a bit difficult. It wasn't easy. Maybe it was crowded. Maybe it was dirty. Maybe it was noisy. It wasn't as easy or hard to get to. So that's what sort of made them, they had to put sort of extra effort to really go and return their containers to a return point. And the never returned, so this was the smaller percentage, the 19% of those surveyed, they had very limited knowledge about how CDS operates. They knew it existed, but they didn't really know how it works. They really perceived, if I'm going to be involved, it's too much effort. It's too hard. I'm not going to do it. They put their eligible recycling containers in the yellow bin in most circumstances. In most jurisdictions, it's a yellow bin. They often lack storage, and this sort of gives you a bit of an understanding of their demographic, but they lack storage space. So a lot of them actually lived in apartments or multi-unit dwellings, and some of them also don't consume many eligible containers. Some there's not enough. It's not worth my while. I'm not going to put 1 or 2 containers and collect them for 2 years before I can actually return it. So they don't do that. This is just the infographics, just bigger so you can read it, but it's all available online, so feel free to encourage you, if you're interested, have a look. I think it's actually interesting in what you find in there. It has things like the age demographic, their recycling behaviours at home, what do they understand the environmental benefits and who they are again. And the idea here is it really is about informing, particularly for government, informing their policy decisions and what they would, what levers they can pull, if you like, to make a difference. They actually have increased participation in CDS. And by natural flow, I'm assuming that means more containers returning. So I've picked a couple of highlights. And this slide's best read if you sort of look across the band. The green is the consistent user, the regular user, the yellow, and the never returned is the red. If you look across the band, really, the consistent users have a strong environmental motivation participation, and this drives their ongoing participation because the behaviour aligns with their value set. So their strong environmental values influences their behaviour. The regulars, again, have a moderate drive for doing their part for the right and continue to participate CDS sporadically because they feel it's the right thing to do, but ultimately not sure what's the difference between that and curbside, is what they found. And the never returned really lack that knowledge and the perception. It just seems too much, too hard. I'll just put it in the recycling bin. It's okay. It doesn't really make a difference either way. It's still recycled. This is the return point experience, and I thought this is pretty interesting. So it has a 0% for the never returned, but overall most people have a good experience with their return point, and like I said, the consistent user has a really good experience. They actually, I wouldn't say the word enjoy is not the right word, but sometimes it's about returning the containers, and again, some depots in South Australia do more than just CDL. They actually do other recycling. You know, you can get scrap metal there, you can do other things. So overall, it provides them some benefit and they continue to return. There is, the interesting part about this also is with consistent users, they do recount mostly positive experiences at return point, but they do risk becoming an irregular user where there's overcrowding at return points and inconvenience about times which restrict their capacity to return containers. So that aspect of convenience can shift people up and down, you know, their segment, if you like. And I'll get to this later, which is sort of the bit of the wrap-up and why is this important. The idea here really, and keep this in mind as I'm working this through, the goal here is to shift someone up an increment as opposed to make a never returned up to a consistent user. It's too big of a leap. The idea is really to get them to become an irregular user and then a regular user up to a consistent user. So that's the key when you think about these things. So with the irregular users, they talk about that the experience wasn't that great and it's not, they just think it's too much effort to go for, so they don't really return their containers. So, but having said that, most people think it's a positive, they recount positive experiences. This recycling behaviours at home slide sort of points out a couple of differences. I don't know if people can read those little bits on the side, but the one on the left is that people will separate their containers at home and then take them to a collection point. The one in the middle is put my CDS containers in the curbside bin, and the last one is I give my containers to someone else who would basically participate for me. So I donate to an extent, or I put it out, you know, one of my friends, or give it to whatever school or community group. And these recycling behaviours have a couple elements to them. One, it really does link to people's environmental values, and it also links to their things like their space that they have available to them and how many containers they consume. And people naturally will gravitate towards what's easy for them and what suits their lifestyle. Not many people will want to have, if you lived in an apartment, a big pile of containers until it's worth your while to take them to a depot. You'll actually gradually get rid of them and just sort of dispose of it. And especially if you think there's not a massive difference between CDS and curbside recycling, you put them in curbside, you still meet your sort of environmental needs and obligations. So there's a couple of key findings. I've just picked a few highlights. So I thought these were interesting, so I thought I'd relay them to everybody as well. And this is just as part of everybody surveyed. So 8% of those surveyed did not return containers because they are unsure of how the environmental benefits of CDS differ from curbside. 17% of people surveyed said easily accessible information about return point locations would encourage future participation in CDS. and 20% of the never return do not participate. They do not know where the closest return point is. So what that gives you is some simple things that can be changed, i.e. just increasing possibly the demographic you reach out to or how you reach out to them can actually shift people up one segment. Particularly, and I think the best one out of that example is that 20% have never returned. They just don't know where it is, so they don't do it. There's a few more key findings. Convenience and easy use was the top factor for good experience at return points. And again, this influences their future CDS behaviour or participation. 30% of the never return segment do not return because it involves too much effort. And sometimes, that was a perceived effort as well. So not necessarily, they just didn't know where things were and how it worked. And 28% of all surveyed said home collections of CDS containers would encourage their future participation, which I think in myself, that one's quite interesting. In South Australia, we have quite an organic at-home collection. If I leave my containers out on the side of the street, someone will pick them up, no worries. They barely last the night. Even if I put my containers in the curbside bin, there's someone that will actually fish through them, and more power to them. I think good on them. But if that became more systematic and better integrated, I think you'd increase participation all round. And this is the last key findings, and then I'll get into a bit more detail of what it actually means. But I know we talked about refund, but 38% of people said the refund makes a positive difference to their household budget. And the interesting part here is most of those people that were surveyed actually are the regular users. So they're consistent users, and it does make a positive influence. People would think 10 cents doesn't make much of a difference, but it does help. And they've reported. And sometimes when we talk about household budgets, not necessarily like that's also for their children's pocket money that's captured in that sort of grouping as well. And lastly, the 28% of the never returned segment and 21% of the irregular users said a barrier for using the systems that do not use that many eligible containers. And that goes to an argument of how many containers are eligible and how easy it is for people to recognise they're actually using an eligible container that is returned. What I've got, this is the top 3 insights to encourage participation as said by the users. So I've got them as consistent, regular and never return, and then the last slide sort of pulls them all together so you can see some trends. So I recommend take a photo of the last slide, you'll get a better idea. But consistent users say, look, if you increase the refund amount, I'll participate more. And the way that I read that is they're already participant, they'll just go more frequently, I guess. Greater consistency of container types, they'll participate more, and again, you've got now more volume that it's worth your while and part of your routine. And most key, the key one is the easy to use return point near me. So it gives you a bit of an idea of, if you're targeting this group to be more frequent, these are sort of the things that they say will actually encourage them to return more. If you talk about the irregular users, so this is, again, what encouraged the top 3 things. Refund amount popped up again. Home collection for CDS containers was a big one. And importantly, they said, look, a return point at my local shopping centre. And what that means is that's part of their daily routine. They have to go to that extra effort anymore. That's no longer an extra effort. It's just part of their daily routine or part of their routine. So, thanks, Anne. So that would encourage them to participate more. And I think that's quite an interesting one, to be honest. And lastly, this is the never returned. And the bit I'll point about here, the deposit amount doesn't come into this one. So they said, look, put a return point in near my local shopping centre. If I had a home collection, I'd participate, and if I had bins in public spaces, I'd participate. And that's again, super convenient, and it's the odd, they don't consume that many containers. They will simply put whatever container is in, and off they go. So this is the slide that I'd say take a photo of this one. What it gives you is there's a bit of a trend here that the refund amount is towards the left, and convenience is at the right. And that's how you'd move that demographic up. And shifting one segment up a level is what you're really after. And it helps really government and jurisdictions to work together if you make this simple and harmonised, people will get it. If you're travelling interstate, people travel all the time, it's very easy. If you move, it's very easy. And importantly, I think, is the consistent messaging is key. People aren't going to be confused with social media. Those boundaries of where you live are irrelevant now, totally irrelevant. So out of all of this, there was recommendations which were agreed by HEPA that we would promote, and essentially there's 6 recommendations, and they're key, and what they're saying is HEPA says this is how we should work together. Doesn't mean you have to do all of them, but this is idea. Again, promoting the circular economy and environmental benefits of CDS. And this is a general, if you educate people, you'll get more improvement, and it really talks to their environmental values, which drives behaviour. Greater promotion of return points in eligible containers, enhancing the container deposit experience through convenience and ease of use. Importantly, they said, look, the refund amount is clearly important, but you need to really understand what is the regulatory impact of increasing that amount. There's no point increasing the amount if you don't actually get an increase in participation. I mean, you can, but you won't really achieve that objective. Removing the inconsistency of CDS eligible beverage containers, and if people aren't aware, some containers have thresholds, so it's the same type of drink, just a different volume threshold or a different juice concentration threshold, and that means it's in or out, so simplifying that is key. And again, consider expanding the scope of CDS eligible containers, including CDSs across jurisdiction. That expanding scope, though, is about beverage. It's not to suggest like other containers or other jam jars or, as James rightly pointed out, glass is not glass. There's a lot of non-recyclable glass, and all you do is ruin the entire amount. The whole load is gone. So this is just a shameless plug for South Australia, but we have a return rate of 76%, and last year there was over 660 million containers returned for a refund, and that equates to about 38,000 tonnes and a bit of material returned for recycling. And importantly, I think sometimes people miss this, that $66 million was refunded to the South Australian community. Yeah. And I think it's key. So this is my, this is my last slide. So it's all well and good to do the behavioural study, but what are you going to do with it? So I can't speak for other jurisdictions, but in South Australia, we started this journey a fair while ago, and we've got three aspects to this. One is about improving or modernising our scheme. So the policy design, and it's not written, so there's not a lot of detail here, but it gives you sort of the general feel. It is about, again, promoting those circular economy benefits of CDS, and it's over other recycling programs, because it is, for beverage, it is a really good program. Greater promotion of return points in eligible containers, and enhancing the container return point experience as well. So that's all well and good for South Australia to do that, but what do you do nationally? Because CDS is no longer just about South Australia, and we recognise the national ones need to be done, or should be done, I shouldn't say need to, should be done uniformly, because it just makes it easy and less confusing for people. But it's again removing those inconsistencies of eligible beverage containers. Consider expanding the scope, so this is the obvious expansion for everybody into wine and spirits. And then also analysing the regulatory impact of increasing the refund amount. We're very clear that we think that should be done together. And learnings made, I know Queensland have shifted, which is perfectly fine, they're allowed to do that, but learning from that experience. Now, there's lots of valuable lessons, and from what I can tell, it seems to have gone pretty good. So thank you very much, that's it.
Time for probably two quick questions. Can I just ask you to please use the microphone, because the session's being recorded for those that are listening at home. Just introduce your name and your organisation. So any questions for any of the four excellent speakers? Oh, sorry, Stephen.
Thanks for that. Christian from Local Government New South Wales. Question for Stephen or anyone else. The 10 cents in 2017 would now be worth about 7 cents in real terms because of inflation has eroded so much of that value. Assuming it goes to 20 cents one day, which it will eventually, do you think there's a case to embed inflation into the refund amount so that it just goes up consistently every year rather than it coming in and then every year after that the real value gets lower because of inflation?
I'll start. Good question. I don't have a view whether it should be as yes or no to that, because I think the implications can be quite significant, and it's again, does the system cope with a 17.2 cents all of a sudden, then 19 cents? People love round numbers. In our work, 20 cents was what was quoted, and some people said, give us 50 cents, we'll take it, and some said 15 cents, and some said 23. So I personally like nice round numbers, it's simple. And I think the key bit, though, is whatever it increases to, will it make a difference and increasing participation? There's no doubt in South Australia we shifted from 5 cents to 10 cents and there was an uptick in return rate, but that alone didn't sustain it for the long term. It's starting to trickle back down again. Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry, I didn't see who. I guess the issue here is cost to consumer, because 100% of the cost to beverage will go to that supermarket shelf. So really you're driving inflation the more you increase the deposit amount. Will you get that 30% of beverage containers that is currently going to landfill? Probably a little bit. But there are some things that Steve had up there. I mean, home collect bin, we've seen in New South Wales, in Queensland, I think WA has rolled it out as well. We've seen a really big uptick for people who don't want to go to a collection point or an RVM, who want to put those containers in at home and get them collected. That's driven an increase, as has, you know, I think I talked about return to retail, but in South Australia, the study, they talked about something at your local shopping centre. So I think there are policy levers that can be pulled there that will drive that return rate without pushing the cost to consumers, because I think it's political suicide for any government that decides to put up pull a policy initiative that will increase supermarket prices. Thanks.
Natalie, did you have a view?
Thanks, Cathy. I think the other piece is obviously the cost of the beverage manufacturers as well, because that's certainly when we were going through the scheme expansion process, something that was really front and centre for them is particularly when you're looking at small beverage, whether it's alcoholic or non-alcoholic, there's a real significant cost in labelling, packaging, etc. So just to add to the points that have already been made, whilst there are many arguments for an increase in the refund amount, a sustained and regular increase is something that would drive cost not just to the consumer but to the beverage industry as well.
Okay, one last question and we'll break for lunch. Obviously, lunch is more important. Okay, thank you all for attending, those online, those in the room, and the speakers. Thank you.